Well, thank you very much for coming here tonight. I'd like to especially welcome students who are here tonight and teachers here tonight, as well as society members, both people who have been with the society for years and new members. And in particular, we'd like to welcome Bill Veilette of the Northeast Document Conservation Center, who is our guest speaker tonight. He was here 1 year ago for the unveiling of the Adopt an Artifact program that the Nashua Historical Society initiated. And since then, we've had quite a bit of success with adoptions of artifacts that are important gems to Nashua. And so we're continuing on with the program. And we enjoyed Bill's talk so much last year that we asked if he would come back and share a few more adventures in conservation. So that's what he has agreed to do for us tonight. He'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then he will take about 15 minutes of questions, and we'll go from there to refreshments if you would like to join us for that. So thanks again for coming here tonight. My name is Mary Ferran, and I'm on the board of directors of the society, so welcome. Thank you, Bill.
Yes, thank you. I don't think I need this. I don't need that. Well, good evening. A year ago when I was here, who was here a year ago? Good, okay. Well, you were the people who missed the vice presidential debates, because that's what was going on a year ago, and we had about half the crowd. So I'm glad to see that the crowd has doubled, and it's very nice of you to come out tonight to hear about these treatments, but more importantly, to support the Nashua Historical Society in its efforts to try to take care of its collections by conserving them through this Adopt an Artifact program, which is really a wonderful model. And it's a program, by the way, we've been telling other clients of ours about and sharing Nashua's success. And I hope you don't mind us bragging about you, but they're very interested in your program and how it's proceeding. NEDC started off in 1973 as the New England Document Conservation Center. We started in a building on the campus of Phillips Academy in Andover. We're still in Andover, but we're in a much larger facility now. And what we do is we specialize in conserving anything made out of paper. We were the first conservation center in the country to specialize in paper. So it could be maps, books, photographs, globes that are covered in paper, anything made out of paper. And what I'm going to show you tonight is two conservation projects. One is what we call art on paper, and the other project is a scrapbook. And then I've got at the end a little sampler of the other kinds of items that we treat that will just be kind of a quick little slideshow of different types of materials so you can see the variety. The first project I'm going to talk about is a work of art on paper called the Garibaldi Panorama. And this work of art is owned by Brown University. The Garibaldi Panorama is a work of art that tells the life and deeds of the life of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was born in 1807 and died in 1882. He was born in Nice, France, but at the time Nice was part of Italy, so he's Italian. He was an Italian general and a politician. And he was famous for having essentially run around the world liberating countries. He was kind of a mercenary in that respect, a little bit of a revolutionary. His victories in liberating Sicily and Naples, which were separate empires back then, ultimately led to the unification of Italy in 1860. And it was that event that precipitated the painting of this work of art. The work of art is a scroll, and it was painted by the British artist James J. Story, or so we think. We're still not certain who painted it. It's 4.75 feet wide, so that would be the height of the image you're looking at here. But what you're looking at here is only a piece of the entire scroll, which is 260 feet long. And you'll get some sense of that in further slides that I'm going to show you. And the way that this scroll was displayed was by, tilting it upright and then, unscrolling it so that you could see scene by scene what the narrator was reading to you while music was playing in the background. So kids, this is the forerunner of television or YouTube. Okay? What you're looking at here is scene number 18, which is entitled Garibaldi Defending Rome. So this was his last battle, I think, before they were able to unify Italy. The item was at the center for over 10 months while we were working on it with a team of anywhere from 2 to 4 people at a time. So conservation work is a very slow practice sometimes. Of course, this was an extraordinarily large object, maybe the largest, I'm sure, that we've done. It was painted with opaque watercolors on sheets of paper. So these are actually large sheets of paper that are joined end to end with overlaps. They're adhered together. To stiffen the scroll so that it wouldn't tear apart, it was bound with canvas edging, and a cord was sewn in to that edging along the top, and it served as a sort of hanger that allowed it to be displayed without the item tearing. So you can kind of see the cord sewn into the canvas edging. The item had been rolled and unrolled many times because it originally traveled around the United Kingdom on display, and so performance after performance, they're rolling this thing out and rolling it back up, and they're moving it around. And so it saw quite a bit of wear and tear during that process, and of course, since it was no longer used, it probably had been stored inappropriately. This resulted in the item having severe creases in it at various intervals because it was not rolled up very nicely. It also caused the object to have tears in it, and some of the tears were up to 5 feet long. So what we did was, and this is just showing some threads and tools and tweezers and things we're using to make some repairs. What we did was we surface cleaned the item where it was possible. Sometimes you can't surface clean on painted surfaces because you'll clean the paint away. So we did the surface cleaning where we could. We mended the tears and breaks with what's called Japanese paper, which is a very long fibered, thin paper that once it's adhered to the item, you can actually see through it. But what it'll do is it'll hold the tears together so that they won't come apart again. And we apply that Japanese paper to the item with wheat starch paste that we mix up in the laboratories. And the wheat starch paste is reversible with water, so it's water soluble. And this is one of the tenets of conservation, is that whenever you treat a document, you want to make sure that you can undo that treatment, just in case there's a better technology that comes along in the future, or for any reason. You don't want to do something that's irreversible. This item also had earlier repairs that were done, could have been done back in the mid-19th century. And what we did with those repairs is, in this particular case, we retained them. And the reason why is that the curators of this collection at Brown felt that those repairs were actually a part of the history of the scroll, and they didn't want to erase that history by having us remove those repairs. So we retained those repairs in almost all cases. Because this is a painted object and you're rolling it up and unrolling it, you can imagine that's what's happening to the paint. Yes, it's starting to flake or come off. And especially where the paint had been built up, it was starting to, disadhere from the object. And what we do in that case, and what the conservator is doing here, is she's consolidating, is the term we use. She's consolidating that paint by applying an aqueous gelatin solution to it with a brush. And that will allow the paint to re-adhere to the surface. But also there were what we call losses, missing areas, where the paint had popped off years ago and it was long gone. And what we do in those cases is we in-paint. We might try to recreate the image to some extent, but if too much of the image is gone and you can't definitively say what was there, we would just tone that area with the predominant color around it so that it's not so harsh looking. So the reason why we don't try to fake it by conjecturally painting in a loss with an image that we don't know what was there. The reason why we don't do that is because that would be in essence a fraud. Would be creating something that maybe the artist never intended. So what we try to do is be very faithful to the work of the artist and not impose our own selves on the piece. This gives you a sense for the size of it. This took up quite a bit of space in the lab. One of the strengths of the Northeast Document Conservation Center is that we could do very large objects. And we also have very large sinks to do big maps and circus posters and things like that. We have a saying at the center that we specialize in the 3 twos, T-O-O. Too big, which is this. Too many, which is very, projects with lots and lots and lots of items. Or too terrible. If you compared us to the medical field, we're like a mobile army surgical hospital. I mean, we deal with really difficult things. And so conservation labs in museums actually will send things to us because it's just too difficult for them to work on, or too much trouble for them to work on. So you can see here that we have 4 conservators, moving this scroll very carefully. I'm sure that when they had this out on the road, in performances, they weren't handling it as gently as our conservators are handling it here. And of course, it would have been propped upright so that you could see it. We also produced for them a final treatment report that gave them instructions on how to properly roll this up and unroll it if they ever wanted to access it again in the future, which they shouldn't have to do because now the entire thing has been digitized and is online. Part of the ethics of doing conservation work is to document. You want to document everything you've done. Again, it's because you want to make sure that people understand, first of all, that the item was treated. Because our conservators can do such a good job at treating a document that you might think that you're looking at an item that's almost new, and we don't want to trick people into thinking that. So we document everything. And before and after photography is a very important part of that. Normally, we would bring things into the photo studio and put them on the camera stand and photograph them, but this item is too big. So I show you this just to show you that we had to go through a little extra effort here to photo document this as we were treating it. The panorama came with a script. And originally Brown only was going to have us conserve the panorama, and then they decided that we really should conserve the script as well. So they contracted with us for a second project to conserve the script. As you can see here, you get a little sense here anyway, the script had obviously been very heavily used because it's being paged through and read, every time they displayed the panorama. The binding to it was detached. It had been originally bound. The paper inside was soiled. It was becoming brittle. 19th century paper is particularly bad paper, poor quality paper. and it had many edge tears and losses to it. Of the 70 leaves of the manuscript, 50 of them had been mended extensively with pressure-sensitive tape. And conservators hate tape. Now, they do buy it and use it for wrapping packages for Christmas and those kinds of things. But tape is very, very hard to remove. There's a product out there called archival tape that is sold by a number of different companies. Our advice to you is do not use archival tape. Don't use any tape to repair an item. In the 2 seconds it takes you to put a piece of tape on something, it could cost you hundreds of dollars to take it back off. And that tape will do damage. The adhesives will stain the item and react improperly chemically with the item. So tape, bad. The script is very interesting because there are different scenes in this scroll, right? And I guess they would pause on these scenes as the script is read. And so the script is marked up with these little red hash marks and the word end to tell the narrator where to stop or where the next scene starts, and to indicate to whoever's scrolling the scroll to move it forward. So it's a little bit like in the old slideshow days when somebody would have to have somebody operating the slide projector and you're shouting to them next, 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 right? The treatment of the script was pretty straightforward. We had some issues with these little red marks were water soluble, so we couldn't treat the script in water, which we normally would do. So we had to treat it in chemicals, which is why the conservator is all suited up here. The particular thing that we needed to do with the script was we needed to surface clean it. We needed to take all that tape off with heat. We use like a very delicate heat gun to take the tape off, but sometimes you need to use solvents to do that. And then we need to reduce the staining from water staining, and sometimes you could do that by putting it on what's called a suction table and just working on a little individual stain and having the stain be pulled through the paper by suction. Or in this case, what they're doing is they're just bathing the whole document. At the same time they're bathing the document, they put it in a slightly basic solution to reduce the acidity of the document so that it will last longer, because acids can eat away at the materials that the paper are made out of, which by this period was wood pulp. And so here's the end stages of the treatment. The item's now been fully conserved. It's back at Brown University's library. And the great news here is that it's been digitized, and the digital images are available to scholars. If a particular scholar does need to see the scroll, it's in a good enough condition now that it can be unrolled safely and rolled back up if done appropriately by the proper people. And it's now put into the right climate-controlled storage environment. It's located at the John Hay Library at Brown, which is closed through the fall of 2014. So if you want to get in there and see this scroll, you're not going to be able to right now. But there is a website that Brown has put up, which is really neat. I was looking at it the other day. What I would do if I were you, maybe the students could do this, is go home, Google Garibaldi Panorama, Brown University, and it'll come right up. And what you can do is you can click on that website, choose English or Italian, and it'll narrate and it'll scroll through it so that you could see what this whole story is about. And it takes about an hour. So, you got to schedule your time for that. But it's a fun thing to do. And there's all sorts of other information on this scroll on the website. Okay, Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy was one of our most famous and beloved first ladies, of course. And when she first got to the White House, her and her husband moved in January 1961. She immediately thought that she immediately came up with the idea of tackling a restoration of the White House. And she was very careful to use the word restoration because she didn't want people to think she was just decorating or redecorating. So she was very focused on restoring the White House. She was taking a scholarly approach to it and recruiting appropriate people to help her with that effort, such as Henry DuPont, who at that time had turned his own estate into a museum called Winterthur. And so DuPont was actually helping the First Lady with this project. So the Kennedys moved in January 1961. By September 1961, they had succeeded in getting Congress to pass a law that made the White House a museum. It declared that the White House is a museum. And they did this in part to protect the White House and to define the restoration as a restoration and not a redecoration. They proceeded to, after this legislation was passed, start to restore the White House. A lot of the money was raised privately. There was very little funding available public funding available for the effort. But Jackie Kennedy was a prolific fundraiser and was very successful at raising money. But the restoration ended abruptly in November of 1963 when John Kennedy was assassinated. So they just stopped doing work. But by that time, most of the staterooms on the ground level and the first floor had been completed. Here, Jackie Kennedy is shown with CBS reporter Charles Collingwood during her televised tour of the White House in February 1962. Now, does anybody in the room remember watching that? You actually remember watching that, yeah. Well, she won an honorary Emmy Award for that because she apparently did such a good job on that show. I think that show also kind of cemented the Kennedys as being kind of culturally sophisticated. So, what we're treating here is a scrapbook of Jackie Kennedy's that documents the restoration of the White House. And the scrapbook is filled mostly with photographs and then samples of materials, like little textile samples, which you'll see in a second. This scrapbook is owned by the John F. Kennedy Library and Archives, which is located in Boston. What it is a very simple binder. It's a 3-ring binder that's covered in paper. Binders now are plastic, but they were cardboard and paper back then. The black support leaves, which are the pieces of 3-hole punch paper that the photographs and the textiles are adhered to, were very acidic and harmful to the photographs and the textiles. Those need to be replaced. And there were lots of little labels that just explained what these swatches of fabric were and what the photos were. The problem with this item was that these labels, the glues, the adhesives were drying up and the labels were falling off. And that's a problem in terms of keeping track of what's there and identification. The textiles, the adhesives used to apply the textiles to the black support leaves were starting to stain some of the textiles, not all of them. A lot of the textiles were in relatively good shape, but we needed to remove the adhesives. And the photographs were actually in pretty good shape, but needed a lot of cleaning, and some of them were starting to yellow, and some of the adhesives were coming through the photos and staining them. So we needed to remove the adhesives there as well. So here, the first step is the conservator is removing everything mechanically, which means they're just kind of very gently, coaxing it off with a special spatula. And sometimes this is very easy to do if the glues are really dry and kind of brittle, and sometimes it's very difficult to do. As every item is removed, it's numbered because it's going to be very important to put the scrapbook back together in exactly the same order in which it was taken apart. So part of this is called collation. And part of this process is to assist the conservator. In this case, we photographed every single page in this scrapbook so that they had a visual record of it to refer to when it was time to put the scrapbook back together. Then we take all of these pieces that now we have taken apart and we start to work on them. And in this case, what you see her doing is removing glues from the back of an item. And she's obviously having to use some solvents here because the glues are not water soluble. Now, once all the adhesives are removed, then we start to treat the items by cleaning them and repairing any tears and those kinds of things. And here, the photograph conservator is doing some surface cleaning with these sponges you see at the top and the bottom. They're very special sponges that don't leave any residue back on the item. It just absorbs the dirt off the item. And then in some cases she uses a swab if she's got something that she needs to focus her attention on. We also collaborated with a textile conservator who's in private practice down in our area. And she did the treatments on all of the little swatches of textile. And what's interesting is that the tools that a textile conservator uses and the laboratory environment that they're used to is almost exactly the same as the laboratory environment for a paper conservator. And in some respects, this makes a lot of sense because originally paper was made out of rags. And rags are textiles. So, they're composed of very similar materials until the wood pulp, era. So she came to our center and did all the work there so that we didn't need to risk moving items out of the center to her lab and back. Once all of the photographs and the textiles and the labels and any other little things that were in these scrapbooks were treated, then they needed to be put back together. And in this case, what we did was we did not reuse those black supports. We put them back onto new chemically stable support leaves, and we attached them with that wheat starch paste that I told you about earlier. Now, here's where it gets a little different. We could have just put these back into the old 3-ring binders, but the problem with a 3-ring binder is you could open it up and the sheets can come out and get out of order and those kinds of things. So what we end up wanting to do is post-bind it, and I'll show you an example of what a post-binding looks like in a second. The other thing that we're concerned about too with scrapbooks is, as good a job as we might do with re-adhering things to the supports, even wheat starch can fail and something could come off and get lost. So the solution to this is to encapsulate each page. Encapsulation is a little bit different than lamination. It's not at all like lamination. Lamination is where you're gluing 2 pieces of clear plastic to either side of an object. Encapsulation is where the object is floating between 2 pieces of plastic. It's just sandwiched between them, and we will ultrasonically weld a little weld around all 4 sides of the plastic so that the item can't fall out of there. That way, if the glue ever did fail, the item won't be lost. It will be, just kind of floating around in the plastic leaves. But you can cut it open, re-adhere it, reseal it in new plastic, and then put it back in the binder. So this is the safest way to do things. And it doesn't go back into a 3-ring binder. It goes back into a post binding, which is what this is. And a post binding is just a straight post that goes up through these spacers. And notice we're also using these spacers because the items within the leaves have a little bit of bulk to them, and we don't want them all squished against each other and kind of bowing out the boards of the binder. So we put some spacers in there so everything lays nice and flat and there's plenty of elbow room, and it's much gentler for the object. So here's what the final product looks like. Now, This is probably the best approach from a conservation standpoint and from the standpoint of preserving the contents of a scrapbook. But it doesn't really look like Jackie Kennedy's scrapbook anymore, does it? Right? The three-ring binder isn't there. It doesn't look like something from the 1960s anymore. But the order is maintained and the contents are maintained. So this is one of the tricky things when you're dealing with scrapbooks is there is no such thing as perfection here where you can have it all. You have to make a decision, a curatorial decision, between the value of the item as an artifact, in which case you would try to preserve that three-ring binder and everything, with it, and the value of the contents. And so the JFK archivists and curators just simply made a decision that it was more important in this case to preserve the contents properly and so that they survive as long as possible. Now, in our world, we also don't throw things away. So we didn't throw the binders away. We didn't throw the black support pages away. We returned those all to the JFK library. And then they could do with it what they want. They might want to keep them for posterity to show people how these scrapbooks were originally housed or whatever. So that is the Jackie O scrapbook. Now, I'm going to show you a little sampler of the variety of the kinds of things that we conserve in a paper conservation center. There are other types of conservation centers that conserve sculptures, paintings, furniture, textiles like dresses and those kinds of things. And your Beth, who is your curator, has found conservators nearby who are experts in these different disciplines who are going to be the ones that conserve the other types of things in the Adopt an Artifact program that aren't made of paper. But this will give you a sense for kind of the variety. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what this is? You notice there's some topography to this. Is that giving you any hint?
Looks like cookie dough.
It looks like cookie dough? Have you had dinner? I think Mary's hungry, or she can't wait for refreshments. This is a Braille map. So this is a tricky treatment because, one of the things that happens when you put paper in water is what? It loses its form, which isn't a big deal for us because what we do is when we're done with the treatment, we put it in presses and we flatten it again, and all's well and good. We can't put the Braille map in a press. It wouldn't be a Braille map anymore. So this is a particularly tricky, treatment, and so everything had to be done dry, and fortunately, it wasn't in too bad shape. We also do circus posters. For those of you who were here last year, we had a particularly interesting circus poster project we talked about, where the posters had been underneath siding and adhered to sheathing, and this was discovered by the owners of the house and donated to a museum, and we ended up conserving them. But circus posters are very large, but we have sinks that could fit that entire poster in it. So, and we're very well set up for the things that are too big. We also do games. This is what board games used to look like in the old days. This was a board game of baseball. I don't know if it was any good or not fun to play. I'm sure it was. This one is owned by the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is a very good custom client of ours. They send us lots of interesting things. We also had, long before I got to NEDCC, we did Babe Ruth's original contract with the Red Sox and his scrapbooks, which are owned by the Red Sox. So that's pretty cool. We do works of art on paper. I mean, you saw the Garibaldi Panorama. That's certainly a work of art on paper. This particular one is owned by the city of Boston. It was found behind a painting at Faneuil Hall, and then they sent it up to us to conserve. And as we're removing it from what we thought was its backing, we discovered a whole other painting, or it's actually a charcoal drawing, a whole other charcoal drawing of Lincoln underneath it. So they sent us one piece of art, we sent back two, which is pretty neat. And that actually happens more often than you think, where an artist will just didn't like the first try and just, he's already mounted the first one on board or something, and so he just puts a whole new piece of paper over it, and the client has no idea there's something under there until we work on it. So this is pretty neat. We work on scrolls. I can't honestly tell you whose scroll this is or what scroll this is, but it's a scroll. So this is a little bit smaller than the Garibaldi Panorama. We work on rare books. Some of them have very intricate, illuminated manuscripts and very complicated treatments. Others are just very straightforward and just, rare or precious because of the author or the printing or the content. We work on scrapbooks, which, you saw the Jackie Kennedy scrapbooks, but this is a more typical scrapbook. Maybe it's a scrapbook of an artist or a cartoonist, or right now we just finished a treatment of scrapbooks of the landscape architects who worked for Frederick Law Olmsted. And they used to joke around, apparently, in the studios, during the day, and they would write cartoons, poking fun at each other and all these kinds of whimsical things. And they would keep them in these scrapbooks. And so we ended up conserving all these really clever drawings that give you a real sense for what it was like to work in that architectural studio. In addition to treating documents, it's very popular now to digitally image collections. And the reason why is the internet. People want the convenience of being able to access items online. And I'm sure the students do probably almost all their homework online. How many of you have been to a library within the last week? See, no hands are going up. How about the one? Good, that's great. How about the last month? Okay, so we've got a few people who have been in the library last month. A lot of students now, even PhD candidates, are just focusing online, and they're not going to libraries as much as in the past, unfortunately. So digitizing is very important. And here's a camera operator. We do everything under camera. In the old days, you would do it on scanners, but there are particular problems with scanners because you end up squishing books and breaking the spines and those kinds of things. Camera's a much gentler approach. The lighting you see there is just task lighting. The illumination for the actual image is flash, which is a little gentler than beating it with continuous lighting. We also have a setup for doing extremely large objects. Here's that Lincoln portrait that they also wanted us to image so that they can create a one-to-one facsimile of it. Way above the head of the photographer is a camera hanging off of a boom. And then this table is a precision platform that is 1/1000th of an inch tolerance from one corner to the next, so that we maintain exactly the same distance from the camera lens. And then you move the entire platform, and the object's held to it by a very light suction. So it's actually a moving suction table on an XY platform. We do slides. We have very fancy equipment. The key is the software, and there's many different technologies of slides, and every technology has its own different color profile. And so our equipment understands the color profiles of all those different technologies and can give you, the most faithful, quote unquote, color rendering of each type of slide technology available, and do it at a relatively productive pace so that it's a reasonable price for the clients. We also digitize X-ray film. Anybody wonder why we digitize X-ray film?
Easy to ship.
Well, who would have I mean, we all know hospitals use X-rays, but who would have X-rays of our clients? And why? Any ideas?
It's inside of something that's sealed up in some way.
So to see inside something that's sealed up in some way, that's basically the correct answer. The art museums in particular will X-ray sculptures to understand how they were made, because some sculptures are built up, they're not carved. You know, they're clay and they're built up on a form, and they want to understand what's going on inside there and how the artist made the sculpture. You can see through layers of paint with X-rays, so you'll X-ray paintings. You'll X-ray furniture to see how the joints are fastened. So you don't need to take it apart and destroy the thing, but you can, from a scholarly standpoint, or to help design the appropriate conservation treatment, you'll do this kind of diagnostic imaging. So there are tons of these X-rays in the files of museums, and they send all the museums in the country send them to NEDCC to have them digitized with this special piece of equipment, which is a $80,000 General Electric X-ray scanner that you only see in a hospital environment. And then very soon we're going to have this piece of equipment. There's a couple of scientists at the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs who are putting this together for us as we speak. Well, they're probably not working now, they're probably home. But they're working on it this week, assembling what they call Irene 3D. And what this is a device that takes a photograph of the grooves of a record or the grooves of a wax cylinder. And it takes that photograph in either 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. And then it turns that photograph, that image of the groove, into a sound file. So a stylus never touches the record, which is a big advantage because every time a stylus touches a record, it wears it down a little more. So the perfect thing, the perfect candidates for digitizing using this technology are what are called instantaneous records, which are records that there used to be machines where you could just buy one as an individual and use it to record a radio broadcast, in your home. And it would cut the record right there as you're listening to the broadcast, and then you have a record of it. So ethnographers and linguists and people like this would go out and record, for example, native languages of tribes, back in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And those languages, many of them, for example, are lost. The tribes are dwindled down, they don't survive. And the only records of these languages survive on these wax cylinders or these lacquer discs. But the curators of these collections are too scared to put a stylus to them because they don't want to wear them down. So now there's this option. The other candidates for this is if you have a wax cylinder that's broken in your collection. We'll be able to image the grooves of every broken piece and then in the computer stitch those images together and then create a sound file again. So it has some great possibilities here, and we're going to be piloting this to bring this technology to market, so to speak, and make it available as a service to libraries, archives, and museums. By the way, 2 weeks ago, the scientists who we're working with at the Berkeley Labs, which is a national lab under the Department of Energy, he won what's called the MacArthur Genius Award. If you've ever heard of those awards, they're actually, the MacArthur Foundation doesn't call them the Genius Awards, that's the vernacular, they're called MacArthur Fellowships. But every year, a couple of dozen people out of 300 million people in the country are selected as MacArthur Fellows, and they're given money for that, and they usually use that money to pursue their research. So he's the only MacArthur, he's the only genius who I know so far, but I got a few years left in me to hopefully meet another MacArthur genius and have them be my friend. So stay tuned for this, and if you have anything like this and any unique wax cylinders or lacquer discs in your collection, Beth, we'll let us know and we'll help you out. So that concludes my talk. I hope you found that interesting. I even ended a little early, Mary, which is always, I always say that no one's ever come up to me and complained that my talks went too short. So I would be happy to entertain any questions, especially from the students. We're brimming with questions, I can tell. Your teacher's here, so you want to impress her.
So I got a question.
Okay.
The organization, Northeast Document Conservation Center, are you guys like behind? Do you have so much work that you don't have enough people, or is it the kind of thing? What's the status?
What's the world like in conservation? Interestingly, we just went through this big recession, and over the course of our recession, our amount of orders went up, 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 up. And so we were looking for conservators and photographers. It's relatively easy to hire photographers. And we have a very nice mix of graduates from Rochester Institute of Technology, which has a really good program, and librarians who are, come at it from a little bit different perspective. And so we have a really nice mix there. With conservators, there are only a few programs in the country that train conservators. They tend to train what are known as paper conservators, who are art conservators, essentially. But then there are also book conservators, and there is no program to train a book conservator. Of the 3 programs that train art conservators, they might produce, a dozen a year. That's it. And so then we're competing with those graduates, with other places like, the MFA and the Met and Harvard and other, pretty attractive places to work. With book conservators, what we do is we hire graduates from the North Bennett Street School, which is a very, very high-end, I hesitate to say trade school, but it's a craft school that teaches many things like piano restoration and violin making and those kinds of things, but it also teaches bookbinding, and they have I think the best program in the country for that. So we take these graduates and who know how to bind books and they have very good hand skills, and then we train them to be conservators, and that seems to work very well. But we would love it if some universities would create some programs to actually do that for us so that we could just hire the graduates and not have to do all that training ourselves. Yeah. But right now, if you brought an item to NEDCC, it would go in the queue and you'd have to wait. If it were a paper item, we could probably get to it within 3 months. If it were a book, it would take probably 6 to 7 months to get to it. Now with the ledger, give you a little update on the ledger, we've snuck you to the front of the queue because we like you. I hope our other clients aren't watching the television. And they've actually started the conservation treatment on it. They're only a couple of pages into it. But essentially what we're doing is we've disbound the book. Does everybody know what this ledger is? Okay, so let me just explain. It's a ledger, has a lot of names in it, right? It's people recording their visit. And then when it ended up no longer being needed as a ledger, somebody turned it into a scrapbook. So then it's got all these newspaper clippings, and stuff pasted all over the ledger. So now you can't read the names underneath. So it's kind of a dilemma. So the goal is to remove all those scraps and re-expose the ledger again so that you could, use it for scholarly purposes and understand what's on it. Am I getting that correct, Beth? Okay. So it's kind of fun. It's every time you take something off, you see some new names. So what we're doing is we're photographing this, and I'm going to share these photographs. I'll send them off to Mary, and then you guys can share them with the membership and let them see their money being put to work. Right? Okay. So more questions. I got to have one student question. There's got to be one student question. I just refuse to leave unless you. You can ask anything you want.
That's a good question.
Okay.
No, I'm not a student
Okay.
anymore. It's been a long time since I was a student.
You mentioned that you prefer not to use archival tape when you're trying to mend a tear in a page. What does the documentation center then use to repair?
Repair a tear. So what they do is, once the item's all clean, the very last thing you would do is you would mend. That's their word for repairing a tear. They would mend a tear. And what they do is they will paint some wheat starch paste onto a strip of Japanese paper that's been torn, not cut. And the reason why they don't cut it is you don't want to create kind of a sharp edge on the strip of paper that will become a point where you would encourage another tear to happen. So they tear this very long fiber Japanese paper, and so it has kind of like fuzzy edges on it. And they tear it to the width they need to just repair that, the strips to the width they need just to repair the tear. And they would apply that with the wheat starch paste to the tear, and they would brush it in gently and then let it dry. And then they would trim the Japanese paper off. And you can kind of see through the Japanese paper, so even if there's writing and you have to mend from the front instead of the back, it's not a problem at all. So.
Is that a practical approach for an historical society to use, Bill?
You mean could a volunteer do that?
Because quite frankly, we use archival tape.
Yeah, I would just immediately stop using archival tape. Yeah, I would just not do it. I think if one of my conservators were standing up here, they would just say, no, you're not. It's almost like you saying to a doctor, can I, stitch my own wound or something like that. Of course the doctor's going to say, no, you cannot do what I do, right? If you're talented and you're trained, I don't personally see why you couldn't do it. But you need to get a little training in that. And we used to give classes on how to do basic book repair, and we backed off on that a little bit because we found out that people were getting emboldened by the little bit that we were able to teach them, and then they were going and just experimenting and doing their own things, and then attributing what they're doing to having learned it from us. So that was not good. So we've backed off on offering those classes. But that's a long answer. But I would say that I'd rather see you try to acquire those skills with your volunteers and use that approach than to use tape, or to just not do anything and put it in a housing or something where it will be safe, like a box, or digitize it so people don't need to handle it or something like that.
Just leave the tear.
Yeah, just leave the tear. It's not gonna, if nobody's handling it, it's not gonna tear more on its own magically. I would digitize it and so people don't need to handle it. And then when you have money to be able to pay somebody to fix it, you could deal with it then. But no tape. Actually, ironically, the archival tape is harder to remove than like Scotch tape. Yes. Yeah. And also Elmer's glue is awful. They really hate Elmer's glue. It's very, very hard to remove. So.
Well, sort of following up on what you were just saying, old books, 100, 125 years old, paper is acidic, as you said.
Yes.
Is there anything, practically speaking, that you can do without great conservation measures to keep it from getting worse?
Yeah, there's a simple treatment which I wouldn't try at home, but you can actually spray paper with a basic solution, and that will adhere to the papers, kind of like a very light powder, and you can see through it, and it dries, and it's not messy. But it has to be applied very evenly and in a certain mixture that will exactly counterbalance the acidity. So if you don't know how to test the acidity in the paper to understand what the pH is, and then mix that formula appropriately to offset it and then apply it very evenly, you could end up doing more harm than good.
So as somebody once suggested to me, dusting the pages with baking soda is not a good idea.
I probably wouldn't do that, no. He's asking if we should dust the pages with baking soda, and no, that's not a good idea. Or spraying like a musty book with Lysol, don't do that. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Now, when in doubt, you're asking great questions. When in doubt, just pick up the phone and call the conservation center, because now I don't know if all conservation centers do this, but we have outreach programs that are subsidized. And so that allows us to pay for staffing that are there waiting for you to call so we can answer your question. So it's free. You know, all you need to do is just pick up the phone and say, I was wondering, you know, can I do this? And then they'll probably tell you, no, do not do that. And they'll give you another idea, an alternate recommendation. Yes?
So as we move into the digital age, it's great because we can have digital representations of all of these artifacts. But the nature of our personal artifacts change, and some would say they don't exist at all because there's so much that now exists just only in the digital format.
Right.
So you personally, as a conservator, do you have just digital photographs? Do you still print out your pictures and have the good old-fashioned photo album?
Right. So the question is, you know, what do you do with all this born digital material? That's our terminology for it. If there never was a paper photo, it's born, you know, from your iPhone, right, as a digital image. You know, do you print it out? How do you preserve it? Since 1995, NEDCC has been giving conferences, national conferences every year on exactly this issue. In addition to, you know, how do you create those kinds of files, you know, to begin with, and what should be the standards and that kind of stuff. But this is a very hot topic right now. How do you preserve digital files and make sure they're going to be there? In some respects, you might think that a digital file is a better solution than a paper file because you can infinitely copy that digital file. It never degrades, and, you know, it should be able to last forever. The problem is that to ensure that a digital file could be opened 100 years from now, every human being that's responsible for that file between now and 100 years from now has to do their job, right? So as there's another newer format that file needs to be migrated to, some human being has to run a program to upgrade it from a JPEG to a whatever, right? If anybody fails to do their job, you could lose that information and not be able to open those files, right? If it isn't caught quickly enough. Whereas with paper, especially rag paper, like an 18th century letter, you can literally just stick it in a plastic sleeve or a nice buffered folder, put it in a box in the right climate, and walk away for 100 years. And when you come back, it'll be in quite nice shape, you know? So nobody needs to do their job other than, you know, don't make sure the roof doesn't leak, right? So it is a real challenge. Plus, you know, these files the only way you could actually see it is through a machine, right? You can't just see it with your naked eye. You have to have an interface. And so you're going to have to constantly be buying equipment to store these files on and be able to view it. And so it's quite a big investment. It's not, I don't think a lot of people think about the investment, the ongoing investment in maintaining digital images. They think about the upfront cost of creating them, you know. And there's a lot of them as well. It's really easy to just click that digital camera. I just came back from vacation, and I was talking with my wife about how, when we used to have a 24 or 36 exposure roll of film, you would think to yourself, do I want to take a picture of that or not, right? Because every time you click the shutter, it costs you money. And now it's just so easy, you just keep clicking. And so it's a challenge. I think that, the thing to do is to make many copies, share it with everybody you can, right? The more copies are out there, the more chances they'll survive. So, give them to all your relatives, all your kids, if they're important to you. Label them. You could tag and label photos so that people know what the heck they are. And because if they don't know what it is, they'll probably won't want to keep it. So, and that was an issue in the old days too, where you have photographs of people and there's nothing written on the back. So the problem isn't technological. The problem is one of are human beings going to be good stewards of these and spend the time periodically to keep these things fresh, and alive. So no student questions? Okay, one student question. You're going to be the last question. Go for it.
When you're talking about cleaning a piece of paper, what does that consist of?
Yes. So you either can dry clean or you could wet clean. And what dry cleaning consists of is literally taking something like an eraser type material. Sometimes they actually use a white eraser. You know how nicely white erasers work? I don't know if you guys use pencils anymore. You probably type everything. See, they don't know what I'm talking about, Mary. Okay, they do use pencils, okay. So white erasers are really good. And they don't leave any residue. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll crumble the white eraser up and then just kind of roll the little crumbs of the eraser on the fabric too, so they're not putting stress, or not the fabric, the paper, so they're not putting stress on the paper. So that's one way of doing it. Then there was this other sponge that you saw. I pointed to the sponges in that picture with the photograph conservator. Those are called a vulcanized sponge. And they're very porous. They have big holes and spaces in them. And if you touch it, it's kind of a material that feels really absorbent. And so that sponge is really great at just picking up dirt and without leaving any residue behind. So that's surface cleaning or dry cleaning. Wet cleaning is where you literally just submerge the document in water. And what you do is you balance the water, you test the pH of the document, and then you test the pH of the water so that you keep everything in balance. You don't want to make the document more acidic. And you don't want to make it too basic. And you submerge it in the water, and you wouldn't believe how much dirt comes out of a document, especially a well-used book. It's just incredible. The water just turns filthy, immediately, and it's remarkable afterwards how white and bright the paper looks just by putting it in water. But people are shocked when they come to the labs for a tour and they see us putting things in water. They're like, "Oh, don't do that." But if you think about it, it's like I have a blacksmith who helps make reproduction hardware, or helped me with that when I did some restoration of my house. And he said, Bill, he was teaching me how to clean iron. He said, what you do is just, when you got a fire going in the middle of the winter, just take your latch, your hinge or whatever, just throw it right in the embers. And I'm like, well, won't it melt? And it won't melt, And he said, don't be scared of that. Iron is born out of fire. So you're just kind of returning it to what it's used to. And the same thing with paper. Paper's born out of water. So we're just returning the paper to the water. It's not going to dissolve and go away. Now, there's things you got to do to make sure that you could flatten that properly, and it gets delicate when you put it in water. But it also helps the paper become more supple again and less brittle, and it cleans it. Well, good. Well, you've been a great audience. Thank you very much.
if you'd stay here for just one second.
Sure, okay.
So just another minute of your time, if we will. First of all, it's great to know that we can call the Northeast Document Conservation Center when we have a question. I think that that's terrific. And if you want to follow them on Facebook, I'm a friend.
Yes, you can be our friend.
Yes. They have great postings of what's going on, and so that's terrific to follow as well. I especially appreciate you talking a little bit about the careers in the field, because there is a need for work done in this field. And it seems to me that it's scientists, it's computer and technology, it's the arts, it's English and other languages, it's the full array. So Bill came to his position through the New Hampshire Historical Society. He's the former executive director of the Historical Society in Concord. So we're very lucky to have him in this area, and the talk was terrific tonight. So we got you something from Nashua.
Oh, good. It's not a manhole cover, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's a
That'd be little heavy to take
bag
home.
of apples.
Oh,
So.
awesome. Great.
So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Really
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mary. Thank you.
We do have a couple of things. If you have not signed in yet, would you please sign the guest book? We would like to note that you were here. Secondly, I would love to have a photo with students and teachers, if that would be okay with Bill afterwards, so if you'd come up. We have refreshments in the dining room, so if you follow your way down the hall and into the dining room, there's, I believe, some cider and cookies, that sort of thing. And thank you very much. The ladies have already left who are on the refreshments committee, but they always do a great job. If you are looking for an exceptionally unique gift during the holidays, we do have some telegraph years that are still available for adoption. It's $80 for a year, and we will be putting the papers in special archival boxes for preservation purposes, and we would send a gift notice to the person that you are adopting that year for. So it's a different kind of gift. We do have some years where people are getting it as anniversary presents and that sort of thing as well. So just see me afterwards. Or if you're interested in the Adopt an Artifact program in general, we do have this brochure here. So we'd be glad to give you a copy of that. And let me just check my notes real quickly here. Oh, put them over here. And lastly, I wanted to encourage students around the holiday time. It's wonderful to invest your time with your family and possibly do something like interview somebody and videotape somebody in your family and ask them about their history, or to help folks in your family label the backs of pictures that they have, or sometimes scanning and creating CDs of information. So do consider that. It's a wonderful gift to generations that come before you. And I believe that's it. So thank you again very, very much. And thanks for coming tonight.